of the Referendum Ad Hoc Committee to order. So proof of notification. Is it the 22nd? Thank you. The notice was on the 19th. That's what I was reading from. Thanks, Dave. So Cheryl, was there proof of notification downstairs?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it was.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3, agenda approval. We have a 12-point agenda, so I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Move for approval.
Okay, motion by Severson. Second by Carroll. All those in favor of the agenda, please say aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion carries. I should mention too, we do have a quorum. Looks like we're missing Bob Frank. Is that right, Cheryl, by your account? Okay. We've got everyone except him here. So public comments. Are there any public comments from non-county board members? Is anyone on there? Okay. Agenda item number 5, approval of minutes. Looks like the minutes are in our folder, so I'm looking for a motion to approve those. Motion by Turk. Second by Severson. Any discussion on those? Okay, all those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion carries. So I'm going to jump around just a little bit on the agenda because I put the agenda together before I had all the meeting materials ready. Agenda items number 6 and 7, resolutions passed at the August 16th county board meeting and 5-year financial plan. I don't have the resolutions passed at the meeting in the folders. I probably have them in my inbox from Clint because I asked him to send me those midday today, so I can get those to folks. If folks want to see those. Agenda item number 7, the 5-year financial plan, that is in the folders. I think I'm going to jump to number 8, public education about the referendum ad hoc committee, because the resolutions and the 5-year financial plan, they're kind of wrapped into the information that's attached to agenda item number 8. So we can jump back to those if we need to. But I'm just going to jump right into that one. And then Supervisor Turk says he's got a demo video he can show us. So I think after I walk through the information, that would be a good segue to then take a look at that, because we'll need to make some decisions about what to do next. So under this agenda item, I've got a recommended motion to adopt educational information to use in communicating with the public and develop materials based on this information to be used on radio, newspaper, and social media through video. So at our last meeting, we passed a motion to develop information to educate the public about the work of the committee. So I'll go through the 3 different communication methods when I get done walking through the attachment. So it's a 14-page attachment. And John, are you able to share that and put it up on the screen, since I don't know how to do that? You can always teach me if you decide you don't want to do it, or if I should learn. I probably should learn. So it's item 08A, public education. It's the one in our folder. That's the cover sheet right there. And if you go to,
He took over here.
Oh, Clint, you're online. I see you now.
Yep, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Yep, this is what you're after?
Yes, that's it right there.
And then I apologize to you. You'd requested the resolutions in a single PDF form. I have that converted. I forgot to send it out to you, so I will drop it in the committee folder here while we're viewing.
Okay, great. Yeah, just in case we need to refer to those. I'm not sure that we will. But. Okay, so there's a little intro here about the purpose of this information. 1, to serve as the basis for educational materials to be developed by the committee so the public can better understand our mission. And this isn't educational materials for the actual referendum. This is just educational materials about the process we're using to figure out if we want to recommend a referendum. So there's kind of 2 stages here of public education. Then the second one is to be used as a tool for communication with different departments and committees at the county. So it starts out with this statement that we're considering the idea of a referendum. Back to page 1. So the voters can decide if the county's operating levy should be increased to maintain current staffing levels and services. And then staffing levels look like this chart right here. At the bottom of that page, it says the county has a total budget of 36 million in the current 2022 calendar year. The budget is balanced, meaning we have 36 million in expenses and it matches 36 million in revenues. And then the next page has a little bit more on revenues versus expenses. So most county budget revenues come from other governments, typically federal and state governments. Some departments bring in a lot of revenue to offset county expenses. And so there's 3 bulleted examples there. I'm using actually the biggest example. So Pine Valley Community Village brings in a lot of federal money to pay for patient care. Health and Human Services brings in federal and state money to pay for programming there. And I've got the 5 main areas of programming that HHS does. And then the third bullet point is the state government pays the highway department to maintain state-owned highways. So ones like US Highway 14 or Wisconsin Highway 60, and there's a lot more of them, a lot more state highways as well. It's a federal highway, but it's operated by the state. The federal government does not own the highway, the state does. Just means it gets more federal money, I guess, when they build them. Yep, it rolls downhill toward us. So then other departments don't have much ability to bring in revenue. And then and we looked at this chart last time. The orange is expenses for each department, and green, those are revenues for each department. And if you got any more questions or want to say things as I'm going through this, just stop and jump in, because this is a draft and we might want to make changes to this before we say, yes, we want to start sharing this, or we might need to make tweaks to it. So the next page shows the property tax. So how do we make up the difference in revenues and expenses in those different departments? We levy a property tax. And so the top bar is our expenses. That's 36 million. And by the way, Aaron, I was thinking as I was putting these together, if we do adopt this too and start moving forward with putting this in different media like videos or what have you, I wanted to send the spreadsheets to you and see if you could make some of these look nicer, because I was kind of on a time crunch and just putting things in there. So some of these I don't think look that nice, but I was just trying to make the visual so that we could have at least one visual. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, looking for comments as we go through this. To me, the point of this graph, the one that shows each department by its expenses and revenues, is to point out that if we're not careful, we could decrease the amount of tax levy going to a department, which would actually end up possibly reducing the amount of revenues they can draw in worse than if we didn't do anything. And that's not that simple to figure out, but I'm just saying, to me, that's the thing to be watching for. It's not actually said in the paper, but we might want to add some text pointing that out.
I have some text later on that points that out for one particular department, but maybe we need some text more overall in this section kind of early on. That's probably true. Okay, so this simple bar graph here shows our 36 million in expenses, and then the revenues that don't come from the property tax are about 26 million. And we make up for that difference with the blue section, the property tax. So this page 4 at the top gets a little wordy, but I didn't know another way to do it. It's just a reality we have to deal with. The property tax levy gets divided into operating and debt. It's 2 parts. We do this because the state has different laws about how we can levy property tax for each part. So the first law says the county can't raise the operating levy at a rate faster than new construction. Second law says the county can raise the debt levy at the rate it chooses as long as the total outstanding debt stays below 5% of the value of all property in the county. I tried to simplify the language a little bit. I think it's equalized value, but I'm not quite sure what that means. So I just said value. So this chart below shows that in the past 8 years, the operating levy has stayed relatively flat because it's going up at the rate of new construction. But the debt levy has risen at a faster pace and we looked at this chart last time to pay for the new building at Pine Valley and highway building maintenance needs in those 2 years that are called out in the text there. I circled the operating levy part, Dave, because I think you had that comment last time that that's really what we're going after. So I tried to focus on that here. So we're looking at the possibility of asking voters to approve a more substantial increase to that red circled area. So then the next page shows departments relying on the property tax the most. So if we take away those federal and state revenues and then fees for services, and I listed out some of the departments that I'm aware of that collect fees for services like ambulance, clerk of court, register of deeds, Simons, UW food service, and zoning. So if you set all that stuff aside and just look at what departments take off of the property tax levy, Sheriff, HHS, Highway, and Pine Valley Community Village, in that order, they take the most from the property tax levy. You can see it in that chart there. So then I pulled out 3 categories that I think I'm hearing the most misconceptions about, or there's the most chatter about. I kind of feel like we should add highway too, but again, I had a time crunch and I just couldn't quite figure out that one. It was going to take some more digging and some more work. I don't know enough about it, but the wheel tax, I think that's the one that's kind of coming up a lot, but setting that aside just for a moment. So HHS, so that's this category number 1, where we have a lot of misconceptions out there. It has the second highest number of employees out of any department in the county. It's 75 employees, but at the same time, it uses less property tax revenue than the sheriff's department, which only has 30 employees. So why is this? It's because it brings in all these federal and state revenues, kind of like you were mentioning, Steve. So I just put it in a pie chart so it was really easy to see the amount that comes from each source and the percent. So if we were to reduce our property tax revenue contribution, some of those revenues would be lost. And then on the next page, this is a blue chart. I was just experimenting with different ones, so maybe Aaron will have a better one when he gets a hold of stuff here. But a lot of people think of HHS as primarily welfare or handouts. And while economic support is what we call it, that is an important part. It's only one of 5 areas for residents, and it has the second most number of employees. Mental health has the most number, and then that's followed by child protection with 9 employees, aging and disability with 8, and public health with 5. And then administration and finance, those are things that obviously are done to make the department run and service those other 5 areas. So I put a note at the bottom below this chart that says, over the coming months, our committee will be working with the HHS and Veterans Standing Committee to better understand how federal and state funding is tied to employee positions. Again, to Steve's point. Then the second category is Pine Valley Community Village. And I think the 2 things I'm hearing the most, and maybe other folks are, I don't know if I've got these categories named right, but one, you hear one side of the maybe you could call them the the Pine Valley advocates saying, you know, Pine Valley makes a profit for the county. And then the other side, more of the anti-Pine Valley crew, says, well, they don't pay their debt. And so I think just dispelling that from the beginning here, and just asking which is true, and then getting the accurate information out there. You know, there's some truth to both statements. And because of those state laws that I referred to earlier about operating versus debt, the county keeps track of Pine Valley's budget in two categories, operating and debt. So the top orange bar, those are our operating expenses at Pine Valley, 9.2 million. The green bar is our operating revenues, 9.7 million. So they do bring in more revenues than expenses on the operating side. But it'd probably be more accurate if we said Pine Valley makes an operating profit for the county. Because the debt payments are about 1.5 million, and they'll be that way through 2036 unless some change is made.
Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it would add too much complexity or not, but I think for me, it's helpful to see the chart that shows the overall debt out through 2037 or whatever, and our debt ceiling and the retirement date for each of those notes to show that at some point Pine Valley is not paying debt anymore, and same with some of our other borrowing we've done, and that I think is helpful for me to see that this is not going to go on forever.
Mr. Chair.
Good point. Yep, thank you.
If you do put something like that together, perhaps you could extrapolate the radio tower project as much as we know into that too.
So a good point. We've done about roughly 8 to 10 notes. I'd have to look back at information to see, but that we're still paying off on. So there's a really complex spreadsheet that puts it all on one spreadsheet, but I don't know that we have very many good charts yet, so we'll probably need some help. But we got the data.
Yep.
We'll just have to get the radio tower data, and we might have to estimate some of that at this point, since we haven't actually done the borrowing there. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, we'll keep plowing ahead here then. So on the next page, it says, in recent years, the operating profit from Pine Valley has been applied to offset the operating expenses of other departments at the county. So if that operating profit was instead applied to debt payments, it would cover 1/3 of annual debt payments, and that's shown in this chart right here. And I'm trying not to get into the debate about where those profits go at this point. So then underneath in the text below the chart says statement 2 would be more accurate, where people say Pine Valley doesn't pay its debt. If instead it said Pine Valley's operating profits could cover 1/3 of its debt payments if those profits were not used to offset the operating expenses of other county departments. And then I put a note in here that over the coming months, the committee is going to be working with the Pine Valley and Child Support Standing Committee to better understand if operating profits can be increased to cover 50% of its debt payments. And that's the resolution that we passed last week.
Do we know where the 1/3 of those debt payments go currently right now in the county to fund what?
If you go back, so Clint, if you scroll back up to the chart on page 5. Right now, the way the property tax gets put together is you have certain items in green on the very right-hand side that lower the amount of property tax that we're levying. And so I believe, and Clint can correct me if I'm wrong here, that just like the sales tax and state shared revenue, interest on taxes, there's a miscellaneous category there. Just like those reduce the amount of property tax levy we have, the sales tax doesn't go to any particular department, neither does state shared revenue. So Pine Valley's profits are similar to that. And we could show them on that chart potentially, if we think that'd be helpful. Because I
Mr.
think
Chair,
that's what happens. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, you've described it correctly. We have it in the AS400 system. There an expenditure line and a revenue line, and the offset essentially just kind of is a money that's sitting in the general fund to bolster it up for all your Fund 10 account expenditures.
And I should say too, I forget now that you say that about the accounting system. I remember going through this with Derek when I made this chart. The fifth from the left, it says Pine Valley Community Village, and it shows just under $1 million. That includes that profit. So if we didn't have,
It's their debt service reduced by the profit margin
exactly,
to account for their column.
yeah, it would be 1.5 million, but it's 1 million in this chart. So I guess we couldn't add it as its own green line unless, yeah, it's already accounted for in that chart, I guess.
So that money is staying in Fund 10, and every time there's an expense out of Fund 10, you could say whatever was from that Pine Valley revenue.
Just like you could say that for sales tax. And yep.
Does that stay in Fund 10?
General operating expenditures, yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
As we contemplate this part of our public education, it probably would behoove us to make the point at some time that this financing arrangement was not Pine Valley's choice. This is a choice the county made years ago for reasons, and we could explain those reasons, but it wasn't that, Pine Valley set this up this way on purpose.
I agree with Dave on that. Somehow it got mixed up in somehow where I always remember hearing that Pine Valley was going to make their debt payments and everything in full. Somehow I think when we were doing budgets in September and whatever, we needed to fill gaps. I think that money went.
There was an intentional shift of that debt to borrowing
Yeah.
because we could. And that freed up operational expenses that put off this committee's work for a couple of years.
And Clint, are in your 23 budget that you're pulling together right now, what's happening with the Pine Valley profits right now?
Right now we have a little over 300,000 that is that we're anticipating coming back for the same general operation expenditures.
Okay, so you're anticipating doing that again next year for next year's budget that we adopt this October?
As currently it's in it, yes. That can change, but that's currently how it's put together. Yep.
Okay, so it's been the standard practice for a few years now.
So one more thought, I guess, I don't know if it pertains to this committee or something for finance or Pine Valley talk about, but since that money's been deposited in Fund 10 or just left in Fund 10, what would it have been if we didn't do that and we left it out and it went towards debt service? That'd have been 4 million now? That'd have been 5 million that we would have paid off?
I've heard $1 million.
That would have been 1 million that we would have paid off.
That's right. Well, we already do borrow it every year. They always have the money ready when we do our budget, is my understanding. And we choose not to apply it to the debt, thereby reducing the amount we tax the property taxpayers. We choose to use it on the operating side. So we're levying the full 1.5 million mortgage payment. So instead of offsetting it by 300 grand or 500 grand or whatever it is in each particular year, we tax the property taxpayers the full amount, and we use the rest to cover these other departments. That's how it's currently working.
Had we chosen to apply that to debt service, we would have had to have found other revenue then to sustain our operations. Right. Well, it's tricky to borrow for operations and maybe not advisable.
But we do have some capital stuff on the operating side. So
Less than we used to.
right. Okay, so I don't hear any more comments there, so just interrupt again if you got any more. So let's go back to page 9. Page 10. It's category number 3 is state shared revenue. So we talked quite a bit about this here. So every local government agency gets state shared revenue. I'm not sure what it's called for school districts, but I know you all get that, correct? Todd, you get the state shared revenue, the city does. And I'm pretty sure every township, every village, every city, every county, we all get state shared revenue. I just don't know what they call it at the school district. I think it's something similar. You know, there's a lot of state aid. So I put just a little history in here that I pulled together from two spots. One from the early 1900s, shared revenue started to share state income tax revenue. So when they implemented the income tax in the 19 teens, they used to allow counties and other local agencies to tax much more property than we do now. So right now it's mostly just infrastructure, but it used to be a lot of personal property that we tax. So at the time a deal was made that if the state was going to implement this income tax and then they would start collecting a bunch of revenue, they would share it back with all these local agencies as far as where people lived. And then in the 70s, actually I got this article from Joanne Krulot. She forwarded it to me. The League of Municipalities has a little history, which I got footnoted here, that in the 70s, shared revenues, they came up with a formula to basically help out parts of the state that had lower income tax revenues compared to wealthier parts of the state. So they did it as a leveling mechanism so that poorer places got a little extra money and wealthier places got a little less money than they were contributing. So then, of course, we know in the 2000s and the 20 teens, there have been a lot of limits, a lot of reductions in shared revenue, but at least up until the early 2000s, that was kind of, that's a very brief little history that I got footnoted. So I think we can be sharing that with people if we want to. So in 01, we received 1.36 million of shared revenue that we could spend on general government activities. And in 2021, that amount had dropped to 1.22 million. So that's not adjusting for inflation at all. So that's that red line in the chart. But if we did it adjust for inflation, and I've got it footnoted here because every time people ask me where that comes from, it's the consumer price index from the that the Minneapolis Federal Reserve has on their website. So that amount today would be 2.09 million if we use 2001 as a starting point. I haven't got 2022 figured in there yet. They do have an estimate up on the Fed website, and we can add that figure in if we want. I just didn't have the time.
Yeah, Sean. I know that this is collection of a lot of information, and as we figure out how we want to present it in the different outlets that we're going to be doing, we may not use the whole file, but for me, I find it enlightening if this graph is right next to the graph earlier where it shows how our debt has grown, even though it's up on page 4. We're operating, it's more or less stable, but you see that debt growing. And that debt is growing because we're trying to fill the gap where the state revenue sharing has been declining. Putting those right next to each other, I think will help inform people the why. How did we get here, and why do we need to do this now?
Okay, great feedback. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I can't imagine that, you know, we're not going to put all this into a newspaper article or a video, you know, I mean, how could you? But I think we can just pick and choose, you know, what we think is going to be the most important. And I do think our standing committees, but it's my personal opinion, should probably see all of this, because I think a lot of them don't know why we're doing this. A lot of other folks on the board, a lot of department heads. So,
Mr. Chair,
it's my thought. Yeah.
so I get questions often now. People heard Marty on the radio saying that state revenue share was declining, which it is. Who can give the best, most concise explanation as to why state revenue share has declined? That's, the public doesn't even know that it has until you said it. Now they have no idea why. And I mean, why is going to matter to them. Not that we can do a lot about it, but I think why matters to them. In explaining all of this, as you just said, why now? Well, look at that chart. It shows more money in 01 than now, whereas inflation, look at the jump. It's a It's a great picture to explain where we are. Who can tell me why the state revenue share has declined?
I mean, I have some guesses based on some things I've seen from the Wisconsin Policy Institute. Um, you know, they're a nonpartisan group, but they try to do a little explaining, I think. But it does get into partisan politics.
I have no doubt.
So, I mean, I think it has to do with, and I think that I can think of a couple of statements I can pull out that might get us out of a pinch if we can footnote a nonpartisan group that summarizes it. But I think it has to do with, we were one of the highest property tax states in the country. And I think there's been a shift toward a desire for smaller government
Mhm.
and reduced income tax at the state level. So that has been what's happening. Income taxes have been going down, the rates, and and I think part of it too was the rainy day fund had decreased quite a bit at the state level, and they were trying to build that back up. So they have, and now we're more at the middle of the pack with the states as
Mhm.
far as rainy day fund. I think property taxes were still greater than average, but we can try to come up with an answer to that and see if we're all comfortable with it. You know, I think there's enough of us on both sides of the aisle here that we could try to come up with something that we could all agree on.
Well,
So,
on this one, just so everybody here knows, because Sean or anybody else here, when you're talking to me and I ask you a question, don't worry about partisan. I don't care. The truth. Why did this happen is what we need to be telling people.
Mhm.
And if somebody doesn't like it because they lean left or right, that's on them. The truth. Because this is real and this is big and we're here. So I don't care. If somebody gets offended, well, what are you going to do about it? I mean, we have to do this. So just tell them.
well, the other reason I pulled back to 2001 is because Department of Revenue data went back that far
Well,
first.
yeah.
And second of all, Democrats were in control for the first half.
Mhm.
Republicans were in control for the second half.
Right.
So I thought, you know, if I just went back to 2011, that would probably rub some people the wrong way. So that's why I went back to 2000.
I understood. I get that point, but I think the graph makes the point very, very well that we've seen a decrease over a long period of time, which sounds backwards. It is backwards. I mean, you know, right?
Mhm.
So it's okay, I think. In fact, it's required to say those things. It's okay to say this shouldn't have happened. It's okay to say you don't like it. It's backwards. I don't have a problem with it because that's the truth. Why are rural counties, why are small cities going through this? Because we're not the only ones. Why is it true? Well, if you sit with Mr. Kurtz or Mr. Markline, they will tell you the revenue share system is broken. They'll say it themselves when you're in a private conversation with them, and they'll say the state needs to fix revenue share in those words. I don't think it's a problem to say that if that's what you believe. I don't, as long as it's the truth, I don't think it's partisan. It's the truth. I don't care which party did it. It's the truth. And the people need to hear the truth. If we're going to bring a referendum to them, it has to be fact-based. That's the truth on that graph right there. I really don't care whose fault it is. I kind of hope nobody else here does either. I think, well, I mean it though.
It would just be nice if it could get fixed because, and I think that's probably, you know, that's one thing we have to be cognizant of because the state is going to be setting their budget.
Right.
They're already going through the process. Departments are submitting their budgets to the Department of Administration next month, something like that. And of course, there's an election coming up, so that could determine things. But if the current governor stays there, they're submitting budgets to the current governor. And there's a new governor. The new governor's got to propose a budget to the legislature, depending on what the makeup of the legislature is. So we're kind of in this spot where, you know, we're probably heading toward a referendum if we do one early next year. But they're also going to be setting the budget for the next biennium at that point, and the decisions they make could affect our numbers quite a bit. But we can't sit around waiting because we know what's been going on, you know, so we have to do something.
And I mean, I don't think we have to say this party did it or that party did it. That's not even really what matters as much as this is what was done and it led to that. You don't have to say those guys did it.
Yeah.
this is what happened, which caused this, and this number went here, and we have to make that up. Is I think exactly how this should be stated, because it's the truth, and nobody's going to stop and care which party did it. Really, it's what does it do to my taxes, to my services, right? That whole thing. And so I just think, here's the numbers, and here's where they came from.
There's
Mr.
an
Chairman, may I
unintended
ask who is
consequence.
speaking?
That was Mayor Todd Coppernall.
Thank you, Mr. Cockerell. Mr. Chairman, it might be helpful to recognize the speakers as they're recognized for the public's information.
Okay, I'll get better at that. Yeah, Mr. Severson, go ahead.
I just was saying just wanted to say that these were unintended consequences to go off of what Todd. So I think that
Yeah.
I do agree that it's not partisan, but I think that when they made it, they didn't realize, or they probably did, but they just didn't want to worry about it then. But these were unintended consequences of what they instituted in the law that we have to face with. It's hitting us more because we're a smaller county. We have smaller money. We're not a big developed area like Dane County, Milwaukee County, Zaki County. So that's why we're feeling it now. And we're actually being the loud voice right now to everybody else, I think. But those were unintended consequences from both parties. What we're seeing now.
That's probably the most careful, best way to put it, and I think if that's part of our message, and maybe we don't even say that directly, but yeah, I think, so we'll develop some language to address this and then bring it back to the committee so we can make sure we're all comfortable with it. If you go to the next page, so what Supervisor Frank mentioned last time was that it would be nice to see the percentage of shared revenue compared to our expenses over that period. I couldn't find our total expenses on the Department of Revenue website. So what I did instead to illustrate that we're relying more on property taxes. So this is kind of what you were saying, Steve, but it's not exactly, it doesn't have the debt called out. That we have to rely more on property taxes to finance departments that need additional revenues, as shown in this chart. So the blue those are property taxes over the 20-year period. The orange, those are state shared revenues. And then I did a ratio. So I just divided shared revenues by property tax. So that used to be 28% of our property tax. And we don't actually do it that way. They get added together, but I just was trying to show the ratio. So the ratio was like 28%. It's dropped to 12% in the current year. So I put a note here over the coming months that we'll work with finance and personnel to better understand the development of the state of Wisconsin budget. The reason I said them is because I'm trying to think, we passed a resolution that had that chart on the previous page in June, and we had it sent to our state representatives and the governor. But I know that we're probably, I hope we're going to continue to be a little louder and actually go and start to advocate for some of this. And I think the Finance and Personnel Committee might be the home committee for that. So that's why I put that note there. Okay, so there could be a category 4 for highway if we want to do that. People have opinions on that. And then I got another section on the next page that says, where do we go from here? So I think what I was trying to do, Supervisor Turk, with your comment of like, how did we get here, is I was trying to use those other pages to show that. But then where do we go from here? I don't know if this is the right segue, but it has to do with some current policies that the county adopted. It goes a little into the past year, but so over the past decade, Richland County's been responding to these state policies by skipping annual pay increases and reducing health insurance benefits. And that's shown in this graphic that the Health and Human Services Department put together about a year ago. So you can see over the past 10 years, there have been quite a few years when we haven't given wage increases or where we gave a bonus instead of a wage increase. It gets a little complex, but I think if you just look at the red and the green, it kind of jumps out at you. People always bring up health insurance benefits too, since that's our biggest benefit cost for employees at the county. And they did a really good job of tracking what was happening with premiums and deductibles over that 10-year period. So it's not the Cadillac health insurance that I think most people think of when they think of government jobs back in, before the turn of the century. Right. They used to be Cadillac. They're not anymore. Now they're, I don't
Everybody
know.
Wanted to have a county job or a job with that. Wanted to have. That was
Right.
like, you were in there? Oh,
Right. Yep. They were very popular jobs for their benefits, but those benefits really no longer exist to that level. They're probably, I would guess, they're more mediocre at this point, but I don't know that. I'm just guessing.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
One piece of information that I think would go right about this same part of the narrative is we've done a little bit of peer review or peer comparison with other counties to understand why we need to catch up on wages for county employees, and that may need to be a part of this also. To once we feel like we've got decent numbers and comparable job descriptions and all that. I think that's going to help explain why we can't just cut wages or why we can't just defer one more year, and explain that we're still trying to catch up. And with COVID exacerbating things, it's made it even harder to fill spots.
Yes. And so Ms. Dole's been doing some research on that. So I think we could work with her and get some information inserted here. I agree. That would be a good spot. I did put a statement underneath the chart that shows that we adopted a strategic plan earlier this year that determined that we can no longer do this. It's not a sustainable path. So we made a commitment to annual pay increases for employees in that strategic plan. And then we also have, I mentioned here, the 5-year financial plan that Administrator Langrecht's been working on. It estimates the additional revenues that will be needed to deliver those pay increases and fund other county priorities. Last meeting, I went through some of those in some detail, but here I summarized it as such as finance, human resources, and maintenance positions. It's a little more complex than that, but I was just trying to boil it down. Then on page 13, and this is probably the I had not done this before our last county board meeting, and so this really jumps out now. I hope it does to everyone else too. But we adopted a set of resolutions at the last county board meeting, and they went through a lot of amendments and they changed a lot since June. And so this is where the county board landed on identified budget. I called them amounts because they're not necessarily cuts, because they could be put on an operating referendum. But if an operating referendum fails, they might very well be cuts. So it's a little, I'm not quite sure what to label it. And those, I put the years though, it would take effect in 2024, these amounts. And I did put in the chart title by 2027 because for the big 4 departments or committees rather, so the blue, the orange, the gray, and the yellow, those are escalating amounts that start at lower amounts in 2024, and then they go up to deal with the 5-year financial plan. So those continued raises, continued health insurance increases, and so forth.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
So are the numbers here, the number it would be in 2024, or are they cumulative totals for the years of that plan?
They are the total. So
it's across the whole time period.
Well, like I'll take an example. I think, Clint, you know the numbers better than I do, but HHS, don't they start with like 350 grand in 2024, and then it goes up to like 600 grand, and then it goes up to 800 grand, and then it goes up to 1 million by 2020.
Okay, so that's the 2024 number there. That's not all
These
the
are
dollars they'd have to cut added up each year to a total.
No, no, correct. This is the total by 2027. So you said 24.
Sorry,
but
27. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think maybe the title for the graph needs a little more clarification of what it is. It just says identified budget amounts by 2027. I think we need to make it very clear this is cumulative cuts needed or something.
These are the projected amounts needed to balance the budget in 2027.
Okay, can you say that again, Supervisor Turk? What you said at the end? I got cumulative cuts needed.
Yeah.
Supervisor Caro said that.
Projected cuts to balance the budget by 2027. Start looking at the 2027 budget. These would be the reductions that would have to be in place to keep things in balance.
Okay, thank you. And then let's see, Ms. Dole said that
Daniel.
Supervisor Rudersdorf has her hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So does this mean that we are not cutting the fair and the parks? We're just cutting certain amounts? And are we doing budget cuts to the four bigger committees? I guess is my question. Are we cutting the smallest committees to try to make up for the loss of the bigger committees, or are we cutting a little bit from each?
So where things ended up, and this is not across the board, but it's pretty close to across the board, is almost every department and committee was affected by the resolutions. Parks was pulled out. So Parks has been left alone. They have a $30,000 budget every year. That was pulled out of the resolution, so it's no longer part of the identified budget cuts. Fair is still in there at 15 grand, but that's assuming that the Fair Recycling and Parks Committee recommends that we move to a nonprofit model for the fair, and that $15,000 cut remains. We don't know that. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And then my next question then would be, if we tried to do the nonprofit for the fair, then the nonprofit would have to then pay the insurance coverage in a floodplain, and that is extremely expensive if even able to be done. But I know that the county has been covering the insurance for the fairgrounds. So how would that work if we had, somebody take over?
Well, that's for your all's committee to examine and look at. You all are to come back to the finance committee with a recommendation
Okay.
looking into that potential model.
So
And
if that model doesn't work and nobody is willing to do a nonprofit where they have to insure it on a floodplain, then what happens if we're not
well,
willing to make that cut?
maybe, it does kind of segue into the next agenda item, because I think some of this has to do with messaging to the committees and what we want our messaging to be. But I foresee it's possible that some departments might come back and say, we just can't do this. We can't make the cut, because that's what we're used to hearing. Now, the way this is all laid out here, if we don't identify those cuts, we won't know what to tell the public they're going to lose with a referendum. The 15,000 for the fair, if we decide a nonprofit model is not possible, it could go on to the referendum if we decide we want the fair to stay with the county. So some of that those issues have to be worked out over the coming 2 to 3 months with those different standing committees.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question too. Those are good questions. But I want to mention too that the larger departments, before we made that amendment at the county board meeting, this pie would have looked much different. We increased the amount that the large committees and departments had to address in order to balance the budget for the whole 5 years. Previously, in the 5-year financial plan, the budget was not balanced. We still had major shortfalls. What this does is it actually balances it for the whole 5 years. And they're significant, but it helps us identify what we could put on the referendum. And it totals 4.4 million. Now, would we do 4.4 million on a referendum? I don't know the answer to that. And so I think that gets a little bit into what is going to be a permanent cut that a department or a committee recommends versus what they're going to recommend for the operating levy referendum. So we've got to come up with some opinion on that as a committee. And we've got to open the lines of communication with the different committees to make sure that they understand it. You could potentially send everything for the operating referendum, but if this committee decides 4.4 million is too much and we want a different amount, then we're going to have to kind of help pick and choose. And there's going to have to be a back and forth with those committees to figure out what dollar amount we're going to land on. It's going to be challenging.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
One other
Supervisor Cook.
clarification, that this is talking about utilization of property tax levy, correct? So if it were replaced with other revenue, then it's still a reduction in use of levy.
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I totally follow what you mean, but when I think of that, that's why I have a hard time calling this chart just projected cuts, because a department could bring in more revenue. So they could even increase their expenses. But if they could, by increasing those expenses, further increase their revenues to outpace those additional expenses, I think that would be okay.
Yeah.
And so we almost need this more creative thinking going on. It's not just cut, cut, cut. It might be, oh, you might raise your expenses and then bring in more money for the county.
Ultimately, that's the impact we're looking to have. That's what we're bumping up against, is our limit of what we can raise for operating revenue through the property tax. So we have to either reduce expenses or bring in other revenues to offset that on an ongoing basis. Obviously, one-time things aren't going to help much. So
yeah, so I don't know what the title should be, knowing that. We don't want that to necessarily get lost in all of this. So let's use the fair as an example, since we were just talking about that. If the fairgrounds, fair committee, and that Ms. Dowd now at the fair department figure out, we actually going to increase our expenses, but we think by increasing these expenses, we can actually cut out the county's property tax levy contribution. And so that's, if the nonprofit model doesn't work, that's one potential solution. They could come up with that. It's just, how are we going to reduce the 15 grand? That's the issue here.
Jump change.
Compared to everything else. And that's why
It
I
says
put
0% on there.
That's why I put it, well, I rounded to I didn't put decimal points for the percents, but that's why I put it in the pie chart too, because I wanted to make sure that, like, sometimes when I hear the coverage on this, I hear all about the small departments. I hear about like a 10% of this pie, and I don't hear the 90%. Look at those massive cuts, those massive budget changes. And so I think we need to help refocus everyone on the bigger picture.
I got something to say, but I don't know if it's regarding this or more of an educational.
Go ahead. It's on your mind.
So since I've gotten on the county board or been elected to it, we made cuts every single year in every single department, cut after cut after cut. What's that dollar figure that they've cut every year? And I think the constituents are probably going to want to know, have we done our best already internally with our money? And I think we're going to need somehow to show them that, yeah, we have. I can't tell you the numbers offhand, but I can probably tell you that maybe since in the last 8 years, maybe the sheriff's department's already cut $1 million out of their operating budget. I don't know if that's true or not. I can, if I do some research and look at it, I can, but just thinking, like, I think we need to know what we've already been cutting out of these departments that we're asking them to cut more for 2027.
Mr. Chair, follow up on Carrie's point. We might also want to bring up the point of deferred capital investment that's been going on for years, and that's contributed to this short-term borrowing we're doing. So our debt load is there, and we still haven't caught up. I mean, yes, we're finally going to do the radio tower improvement, but there's some other stuff looming over us that's beyond its life, and we should point that out too, that we're not in brand new infrastructure. We have stuff that we've put off for a long time, and it's coming due.
Or we're kind of making it aware that we're making it due. Because I think we've always deferred it and we said, no, but I think now that we've defined items and we tasked the administrator with make these happen, and this is what he's doing. So now he's putting it in there to now where we're discussing to try to make what we've always said, no, we can't do it, to try and make it happen. In order for that to happen, we have to find a way to pay for it.
One thing that I don't want to get necessarily lost in a comment like that we have all these deferred capital needs is that we did raise property taxes starting in 2021. We raised them by 1.5 million, so it was about 15% that year. And we greatly invested, we greatly increased the investment in our maintenance capital needs. Was it enough? Probably not. But sometimes I'll hear, well, the maintenance needs just keep growing. Well, but we did actually take a big bite into those. The highway department has been, the amount of resurfacing they've been doing in the past 2 years has been far and above what we've been doing. You know, I know we've replaced almost every roof in the whole, on the whole county, all county buildings that we have in our portfolio. So, some through hail insurance, but some through actual investments coming through property taxes. So I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I also don't want to say the county's on fire, we're not investing. We're not doing it and we need to. We have been increasing it and it is still an issue. I don't think the pace is high enough.
No, I agree. You're right. I mean, but it needs to continue. And, you know, let's not forget, we've got that jail sitting out there somewhere in the next 10 years. So stuff like that.
Mr. Chair, your point is well taken because we're not facing a capital crisis right now. We're facing an operational funding crisis.
It's part of the argument that we've been responsible with the county's money.
Yes.
Which goes back to my thought, Mr. Chair, with like, you should tell the public that we have tried to, been doing that.
I did ask former county board chair Kirkpatrick to send all of her budget summaries. She used to present a budget summary each year, and they're sitting in my inbox. I haven't even opened them yet, but they're there. So that's one potential place we could look at for cuts that have been made. It's going to be just knowing what I know about working with the clerk with the budget by department document that helps pull a lot of this together. It'd be a big time investment to figure out what the sheriff's department budget has done over the years because we haven't been keeping track of budgets by department. We've been keeping track of them by fund. And the sheriff's department has many fund numbers. And so it would take a lot of work. I just know it would. But maybe there's something in her documents that can help us. But I think I'm hearing your all's point. We need to have a section in our talking points for the public about what the county's already done. So I think that's what I'm taking away from this. And we'll come up with some language that hopefully doesn't take 40 hours to research is what I'm hoping. So. Go ahead, Mr. Carroll. Yeah.
To that point, you've been putting a lot of work in rounding material up, creating graphs for quick visual understanding, but you know, I'd be willing to help with some of this. Hopefully we can figure out some other action items that people right here on the committee can take that matches what they're comfortable with, and we can kind of spread the load a bit. And time is of the essence. We got a lot of stuff to do, and we can't load up either you or Clint with all of these information requests. I think I'm willing to pitch in where you think I might be able to help.
Okay, that's great. And that's a good segue. So the last page in the document is next steps. And so I've got next steps, number 1. This is on page, it's right below that pie chart. So page 14 of 14. 1, to communicate directly with committees and department heads affected by a potential referendum so that expectations are clear. I don't see myself doing all that for sure, or Mr. Langreck doing all of it. So that's the next agenda item, and we can go through that. The second point is researching other operating levy referendums. I know you mentioned to me offline you might be interested in that one, Steve. So I think that would be that's helpful. You might remember I did a quick Google search of all 72 counties to come up with 8 articles, but we need more research done into that. That's not really hasn't been done very well, I guess, in my opinion. The third one is educating the public about the work of the committee. I know that that's what this agenda item is for, and we'll go ahead and go get back to the motion here when we get done with this, but we've got to, I was thinking it might be possible to draft radio, newspaper, and video segments between now and the next meeting so we can have drafts. I don't know if we need to edit this document first to do that. You know, I'm okay with that if we're meeting every 2 weeks, I guess, but that's what I was kind of thinking. But that's gonna take quite a bit of work, because so for like radio, we have to identify who on the committee is gonna be on the radio to go through these talking points. With the newspaper one, we have to identify who would write the newspaper article. So I just encourage everyone, as I'm going through these, think about your skills, you know, and your interests. With the video, we're gonna need to identify people who would put the video together. I'm sure people who would help us be on the video. We got 2 great people for that in the room, but we need to identify those people and split that out. And then I've got under point number 4 here. This is kind of the stuff that's already in the outline that we adopted, but eventually after we do these steps, we're going to have to recommend this action, and then we'll be drafting a report. So that's what I'm laying out as basic next steps. It's not like these are the only steps, but they're roughly in order, but they don't all have to happen exclusively. I think some of them could happen simultaneously.
Mr. Chair, is this the right time to try to pencil in dates or deadlines for some of these to get a feel for?
I think that's a good idea. So let's just go through them one by one.
Yeah, and by the way, at what point would we do actual, I don't know, meeting with groups or face-to-face or forums besides the electronic media?
So the way I laid it out in the next agenda item is we've got basically short-term education and long-term education. So I was thinking that the short-term education is educating people about what work we're doing right now. The long-term education is if we decide to recommend a referendum to the finance committee and we lay out the date, the amount, the purpose, then we have public education content and format that we'll want to be developing for that. And that's the long-term stuff. So say we decide at the December county board meeting to have a referendum in April. Then there's going to be January, February, and March for us to be educating the public about why we have this referendum on the ballot. So that's more the long-term education. So when we think about, you all actually helped me with this last time because I started thinking about short-term stuff and you all were thinking long-term. And I think both are really important, and we just have to kind of lay that out in our mind that we're doing 2 sets of public education.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
So I offered at the first meeting, I reminded everyone that I do the morning show the first Monday of the month, every month on WRCL. Now in September, that's going to be the Labor Day holiday. So Ron Fruit and I need to talk about when I'll do it, but I will do one. Are there points that you would like me to make the next time I'm on the air? Are you ready for that yet? Because I'll give you some time. I'll give this some time. I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be great. Let's go through the timing on these and then let's put a pin on that question because I'm not quite sure how to answer it yet. I think we have to decide that as a committee. So the first one, communicating directly with committees and department heads, most of them have an October 31st deadline of returning with a report to finance and personnel. So I think that has to happen in September and October. I think we have to go to the next meeting. So that's the next agenda item. So we can go through the calendar on that one. So I think we can skip that one for now. Researching other operating levy referendums. I don't see why we would wait on that one. I think we could get started on that one. So certainly, Steve, if you'd like to volunteer for that one. Is there anyone who wants to help Steve or, and if not, I'm not trying to pressure anyone. I'm just want to offer it if anyone wants to do it as a two-person activity. Yeah. Well, I think we need one or two people from the committee to do the research and then figure out how to organize what you find and present it back. So I don't know exactly what you're going to find. Sometimes when I research something, I start with like 4 basic questions I have, but then I ask the questions and then sometimes I learn things I wasn't even expecting. And I put those in separate notes, but I always try to organize it in like a page or 2. What did I find? You know, because otherwise it might be TMI. You might, so I think whoever does it, you just kind of have to go through the process and then.
What about referenda are we asking them to research? Successful strategies, just what happened, or what's the focus, I guess, is what I would wonder.
I don't know.
Mr. Chair,
I'm not sure.
at this point, I think it's open-ended. First is literally finding them, and like you say, you did a quick search and didn't kick up much. So we're gonna have to do some digging to literally find them, and then play it by ear. If there's someone who's very communicative and has good information, you pursue that as much as you can. If someone doesn't have good information or is not really applicable to our situation, then you move on, and we'll just keep going and find everything we can.
Mr. Chair, you have a couple comments on there.
Okay, so Supervisor Ruderstorff says, I think we need to talk with department heads first, and I would help if I was on the committee. Oh, well, I think you can still help, even if you're not on the committee, but that's up to you, of course. I know that the report that Supervisor Severson found has some good starting questions, though. To your point, Supervisor Turk, what would we look at? I think they organized it by what was successful, what wasn't, what passed, what failed, when the election was, when it wasn't. So I would think that report might be a good potential starting point too, to come up with some general questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, Mr. C.
Would your committee consider involving our corporation counsel in researching the legal foundations for a referendum and the various options and alternatives? Wouldn't that be helpful to the committee?
Well, we already went through the statutory authority at the last meeting. There's some information that is published out there. Supervisor Turk just sent me a 2-pager from the Department of Revenue. I think when we get to the point of developing the question, we'll want to make sure that corporation counsel is involved. Personally, I think it's a little too early to involve him. We already have the statutory language, so we've got it sorted out as far as roughly what we can do and what we can't do. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you're interested in helping Supervisor Caro, just let him know, and then we'll look forward to hearing some reports back about research. We meet every 2 weeks. That's my deadline always. usually the day or two beforehand. I get my work done. You might want to start a little earlier. You might want to not carry on my practices. Education about the educating the public about the work of the committee. Do you all think we're ready, or do you think we need to take another look at this? We need to make some changes to the documents. Can we start drafting the, yep.
Mr. Chair, I think we're ready to start. We don't know everything we want to educate people on yet, but we need to start now.
Okay.
And get stuff out there now about the work of the committee and why we're meeting and what we're looking at. And by the time we get a couple more meetings down the road, I'm thinking we'll have a list of different topics we want to put stuff together on. But I do think we need to start right away.
Okay. Okay. Anyone disagree with that?
Oh, Mr. Chair, I absolutely do agree with that. I think it's very important in the coming months that consistent information comes out. And it's not going to be the same. You're going to learn as you go. We all will. You can't, I think it would be a terrible mistake to try to do this in one big dump when you think you're ready, because people won't absorb that. And in the meantime, we're still in a state right now where emotions are out in front of information. And so, you know, oh, they're going to cut the fare in the ambulance. Okay, calm down. Tell them what you know, and then the next time tell them more, and do that consistently through the next 6 months.
Yep, I understand. Okay, so I'm thinking numbers 4 and 5, those are going to come later after we do these earlier steps. So let's go back to the cover sheets. So 08, public education. Mr. Langreich, if you can go back to that tab. Yeah, that's great. So I've got a recommended motion to adopt the educational information that was attached that we went through to use in communicating with the public, and develop materials based on this information to be used on radio, newspaper, and social media. So down in these further bullet points. So this is what I'm thinking we need to develop for our next meeting. For the radio, develop a list of recommended guests for a morning show segment in mid to late September with Ron Fruit to be considered at the next committee meeting. We probably also could add Mayor Todd's segment that he'll be doing in early September. And you do already have some talking points you could use from this, but we'll probably be amending the talking points.
That's fine.
And developing them. Then we got newspapers. So I added the Boscobel Dial and the Muscadet Progressive, which were off this list last time. So we need to draft a letter from the committee to be published in mid to late September. I was thinking we could consider that draft at the next committee meeting.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
It could be a letter, it could be a press release, it could be, you know, any kind of different format. Letter kind of makes you think of letter to the editor, and that's one section of the newspaper. If you put it out as a press release, it's news and their discretion where they decide to put it. And maybe both.
No, I like press release, not letter. I think press release is more appropriate.
Okay.
But we need to say it's from this committee, I think. Supervisor Frank asked last time if we were going too far. We debated that a little bit, or maybe 2 meetings ago. I did bring this up at Finance and Personnel, and they had no issue with us doing this outreach and education about the work of our committee.
So Chair, they were fine with this committee being the voice of Richland County.
For the
Right now.
purposes of
Yes,
the
sir.
referendum.
Okay.
Yes. The chair's, I believe, exact words were, "No, you won't be censured for doing that." Kind of jokingly.
So I'm going to extend an invitation to the committee chair. If he would like to, you can join me for my radio show. If there's anything that you would like to add, because I'm not going to, my whole time I'm there for the city. So I'm not going to do county for the whole time I'm on.
Of course, no.
But when I do, this is a big one, guys, right? We're not talking about whether to paint yellow stripes on a parking lot here. I think having somebody from the county board that's going to be better versed than I am on anything you want to share from the county's perspective. You don't have to do it. I'm fine if you don't, but you're welcome to join me.
Yep, no, I'd be happy if the committee's okay with that. I think for the radio, I think we'll have to think of this in 2 segments. when you go on, that'll probably be a smaller one, maybe a warm up, so to speak. But the second one, I think it's usually 45 minutes. We're going to need more than one person. We're going to need at least two, maybe three. And I don't know that they all have to be on this committee either. We could think creatively about other people that might be on the radio segment. So if anyone has any ideas right now, definitely open to those.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
this is.
Go ahead, Mr. Brewer.
Chair Brewer, and of course, whatever I can do, I'll be there. So I like working with the mayor. So we make a good team when we speak together, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. I agree with that, and it's fine with me. My invitation was to Sean because he's here and he's this committee chair, but I don't, if it's Marty, that's fine with me. The
Well,
point is
or
to-
both of us.
Or that's fine too.
Yeah.
The point simply from my perspective is that we communicate with the people consistently and often, and you're all gonna have something to say. You're welcome to join me.
And Mr. Chair, planning for our own, think of that as an ongoing conversation, not a one-shot deal, because it would be the first appearance of a series, I'm sure, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Clinton Langrick and I have already done two shows, two Ron Fruit interviews, so.
Okay, any other thoughts on the radio?
Just one other suggestion, Mr. Chair, that while WRCO is our local radio station, that's wonderful. We're not necessarily bound by that. We could do our own podcasts or things too, if that's something we chose to pursue. Never guaranteed that anybody will listen to it, but you can create it. Yes, put it on the county website, put it out on social media, wherever you could. It's longer form than a short educational video. It could be a sit-down conversation.
Okay, good, interesting ideas. I had listened to a lot of podcasts, so I think a lot of people do listen to those. Okay, so for the newspapers, we'll be drafting a letter. Is anyone interested in, a press release? Is anyone interested in drafting a press release?
If you give me the information, Mr. Chair, I can edit it into a press release form.
Excellent. All right. So we'll have Supervisor Turk take care of that, and then you can bring that to the next committee meeting?
Sure.
Okay. Video and social media. So I wonder if this might be a good time to watch the video, the demo video that you put together, Supervisor Turk. So
I just took some initial information from stuff we already had and threw it together in a little less than 5-minute video, kind of talking about, picked out two things to talk about within this video, and that's probably the most you want to do in this kind of format. So I'll let you watch.
Member of the Richland County Board and the County Board's Referendum Ad Hoc Committee. We're trying to help people understand the county's financial situation and how we got to this point, why we're even thinking about a referendum. And you probably won't be surprised if I tell you there are a lot of reasons why the county's in the financial position it's in. And it didn't happen overnight. It's been happening for quite a while. But there are two really big factors that play into the county's. I'm going to take just a minute to turn. Among the reasons for the tight pressures on our county budget are two things that we have no control over: state shared revenue and state property tax levy limits. Shared revenue is a payment Wisconsin makes to counties and municipalities twice each year to help those local units of government provide services to their citizens. As you can see on this chart, not only has the amount of this aid to Richland County not kept pace with inflation, it has actually gone down the last 22 years. In 2001, Richland County received about $1.36 million from the state. By 2022, following the red line, this is down to about $1.22 million, a loss of almost $150,000. If you factor inflation into it, assuming the state had kept providing the 2001 level of aid, adjusting it for inflation every year following the green line, by 2022, that aid would total almost $2.1 million. Have the same budget impact on operating costs as the state aid did in 2001 for Richland. We need over $866,000 more coming in. That's not all of our budget. It's a big chunk. The state also limits the property taxes Richland County can collect for operational expenses. In 2004-2005 state budget, the levy was frozen. But the dollar amount, it's only allowed to increase each year by the amount of net new construction in the county. The state calculates that number every been pretty low in Richland County. In this chart tracking 2018 to 2022, the lower line represents the actual allowable operational tax levy each year. And you can see it actually went down 15 and has been only slowly increasing since then. The upper line is what the levy would have been if it had been frozen at the 2018 level, but allowed to increase for inflation each step. Any new spending just keeping up with inflation. While the actual tax levy grew a little over $6,000 in 9 years, it falls about $725,000 short of keeping up with inflation. Everything we do costs more every year. Two major sources of revenue have not even come close to keeping up with inflation over time. Again, these aren't the only reasons for our budget struggles, but they are significant. So we didn't get here overnight. Figure out where we go. Hope you find this explanation helpful. For more information on the record. Thanks for watching. I love it.
Up around the edges, but it was second.
Yeah, go ahead. Others. Reactions or thoughts?
I liked it, and it also obviously is meant to be part of a series. And that's a good, to me, it's a good start to a series. But yeah, there's a lot more to the story. But that was seemed to me like a good start.
Okay, and Supervisor Ruderstorff said, "Thank you for the video. Very well presented." So I'm hoping that if we pass this motion here today, we can just keep moving on these, and start producing things and just bringing everything that's produced back to this committee. And I think as soon as this committee approves something, then I think it can go ahead and go out. That would be my take on it.
My intent for this was just to be an example of what we could do. I did all that, this afternoon, used between PowerPoint and a video editing program, and I shot the video of me just on my cell phone with a selfie camera. So you don't have to have, $1 million worth of equipment to create stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be me on camera. It could be anybody. I was just willing to do it. So any particular message we want to package in that kind of format, we can create something like that. If it were going to be released, I'd want to put, a title on it and some fancier finish and end, links to our Facebook page, things like that.
I guess I really like that video. I guess my question for you would be, if you could change stuff on there or redo it, what would you do to make it?
I'd want to tighten up the statistics a little bit because I've misquoted the chart from saying it was 2022 and it actually only went through 2021. So I'd want to clean up that because somebody will pick out those little errors but you said, and so edit those little things and redo it. But that's a tweak to the PowerPoint. So, and smooth it out a little bit. It's like I just kind of slammed the pieces together, and I'd want to make it a little more formalized. We have, county logo branding. Let's start using that kind of thing.
I was thinking that instead of having you showing your house in the background, maybe like have the courthouse lawn.
Oh yeah, I just stepped out on my front porch.
Yeah,
Right.
Clean that up a little bit like that, make it pretty professional, or maybe right in the county boardroom. I don't know. Who knows?
Yep. We could do it with anybody.
Richland County government on the backside.
Dave, very good factual presentation. You're obviously a comfortable, accomplished speaker. We knew that. Nice job. I would recommend one change in phrasing. Early in the video, you said two things we have no control over, even if that's true. I think it's a lot cleaner to say something like things are decided at the state level or controlled at the state level.
Yep.
But then we don't have control of this, just what I would say.
Mhm.
The only other thing I'm gonna say, I said earlier in this meeting, the example right now is when you talk about how revenue share has been declining, always tell them why. That is Steve Jobs 101. Every product he ever introduced, he told his marketing people, well, don't tell them what it does, tell them why we made it. So the iPod, we put 1,000 songs in your pocket. Why? So you have the soundtrack to your life right here. They didn't say what the technology in it was because nobody cared.
Mhm.
It's what it did. And that thing blew up, right? You know that. So make sure it's great. You're really good at this. Make sure the why is always in there because that's what people will take away from the video. That's a really good graphic presentation and all that, but the conversation point is what we need is for the people who see and hear what we say and produce, that they absorb it and repeat it. Because that's what's really going to spread what we're trying to tell people. And they need to see the graphs, but they won't absorb them. They'll read them and go, okay, why is what sticks? And that's from 11 years in a marketing agency.
Yeah, and obviously we have a little more work to do to developing that. So, yeah.
But it's a really good approach though, Dave. It's a really comfortable, easy to watch and listen to approach, which is what matters more than anything else.
Mayor Todd, make sure I understand. It sounds like you're saying we need to have the why behind the why. In other words, this is why we need to do a referendum, but you're saying, well, why did the numbers trend the way they did?
Yeah, anticipate the next question from the public in this case. So you say to them, state revenue share was this number in this year, and now it's down here. First question, I'm telling you, if I wasn't an elected official and I heard that, why? And I don't mean spin it with a partisan spin. We're way past blaming Democrats or Republicans. Nobody cares anymore. They want to know why you want to cut their fare and take away their ice cream, which is where they went. So the point is, so the point is, the reason the county has a budget shortfall is, okay, and then we get into revenue share. Well, and the reason revenue share has declined is, and don't say, don't say Scott Walker did it or Jim Doyle's the reason. Nobody cares. This is why, because state law says this, because then we're off the emotion and into the facts. And when we're into the facts, now you have their attention to deliver the next piece, and the next piece is, and because state revenue share has declined over the last 20 years, what we've done in reaction to that, and then you get into where Kerry was going, well, we've already cut this, we cut this, we cut this. We haven't been, we've not been sleeping over here. We're working on all of this, but this is where we've gotten to. So this whole process is, where are we, why are we here, and then what are we suggesting to do about it? And so those pieces of information, the public doesn't know any of this. Public doesn't know. The public doesn't sit in committee meetings all the time and work on the budgets and all of that. They just don't. I mean, how many, if you at your county board meetings, it can't be much different than city council. How many different people show up from month to month at your meetings? Would you say?
Lately, it's been more.
But yeah, but you know where I'm going with
Yes.
this. But you know where I'm going with this. So this really is from the bottom to the top education. So the only thing I'm saying, it's really well done. I'll say that 5 more times if you want. But remember that we're talking to people that don't do this every day.
So I'm thinking that because you're going to be developing more videos before our next meeting, I'm going to be developing some of that additional text to go into this informational packet. So if you need any of that additional copy for anything, then just let me know before the meeting and I'll provide it to you. And then we'll bring it back to this committee so the committee can, look it all over and tweak any of it. But
if you want me to tweak this video and then build 1 or 2 extra, just let me know what you want them to be about. And I'll try to pull together what we have available to create something similar in format.
So is that going on Facebook? Where's that going to be distributed?
Nowhere yet, but
so
I assume Facebook, county website. I see in the chat we had TikTok mentioned. A lot of people use that. Instagram.
I was thinking we could start with a list of Facebook groups because you know, that's probably where the majority of Richland County residents are. But then, yeah, I see Supervisor Rudersdorf has all those other ideas. But for the next meeting, if we could at least just get a list of Facebook groups, because I know several of us in this room are on several of those Facebook groups. We could at least start with that. My opinion, Dave, is just develop a few more videos. You've got a lot of information to work from. I think you did a great job with the stuff you picked out. Give us some stuff to react to. You know, create a couple, and then we can tweak them. That's just my opinion. I don't have, maybe my mind's too full already. But Mr. Severson?
This is kind of directed, if I could, to Mr. Cooey. How many Facebook pages does Richland County have?
Like
16 Facebook pages Richland County has that we operate. That's like the fair, parks.
HHS sheriff's.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sheriffs.
Sheriff's is popular.
Yeah. So we got 16 that touches, you know, sheriff's department is a huge following. Oh, we wouldn't even, I know the mayor helps out with that. Why they won't get connected, don't know.
No, Richland County. Before I was an elected official, I founded a group called the Richland County Information Exchange.
Okay.
And then there's Richland Center yesterday and today. You know, you're from Richland Center. If I've got the RCHS 80s group, which is people who grew up here. Some live here, some don't, but their parents do. There's all kinds of ways to get to these people now. And again, I can lend some city sites too, because the city does in fact exist in the county. So there's a lot of ways. I think we could absolutely bury Facebook with this.
And once we get it out there and available, any of us personally can go on Facebook, access it, share it to other pages that we're a member of, and circulate it widely. Yeah,
Or our own
as
pages.
Mayor Todd made a point of, you know, there's how many people you said watching that one where you were out by the.
Yeah, well, the Dunkin' Donuts is
Yeah.
coming to town video got 12,000 views in the first day and ended at 15.5, and it's because it hit a nerve. And this is going to hit a nerve. The next thing I was going to say about that, free advice. This is going to bring every opinion in the world. This is going to bring emotions because people are already heightened before the first video came out. Let them say it. Don't steer. Let the public respond with whatever it is they're thinking, because what's going to happen, I'm not going to teach you about Facebook algorithms tonight, but that's going to help. And the other thing is, we will all learn what we need to tell the people based on what they say back to us. If you just let them go and then read it later, and the worst thing you could do is argue with them, because they're not being factual, they're being emotional, and they're reacting back. Let them do it, and then at the end, read through it and discern this. Okay, we need to address this. The point is, we're going to want as many views as we can get, because we're coming now with the truth. We're not coming with somebody's opinion or something we heard downtown. We're coming with the truth. So let them talk for as long as they want to, and then don't interrupt that.
And then I have a question for Mr. Unbehan. So if I send you all the spreadsheets, and I'm sorry, I have multiple ones, data all over the place now after doing this for a few years. Can you take some of these and play with them and make them look nicer? Okay. And then, so then Supervisor Turk, if you're going to develop any videos that have charts in them, you'll probably want to connect with him to see if he wants to make some of them look better than what I produced. So I'd welcome redos of all of them, or whichever ones you think need the most help, and whatever you have
And
time
if we're
for.
creating videos, the more visuals we can put in it, the better. You know, more charts and less of my face.
Just give me the data sets and I go through, and you have additional data to a chart.
I will.
It's like that one chart that had obviously was a clustered one. This was the gray line.
Yes. Yeah.
If you give me more data, I can.
Okay. So I'll do my best to package up an email, and you might have to get in touch with me with questions, because it's not all organized in a way that any normal person could understand now. So I'll do my best.
Yes, I'll definitely verify with you.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Mr. Seat?
Yes, just a short comment. I've been reflecting here. What an outstanding committee you have. You've done a great job as a leader here, and you have some great talent on your committee. I'm so impressed with the intelligence that's coming across. I was thinking also that anyone who, if these last two meetings that I listened to were broadcast, what a tremendous message of transparency and serious, intelligent work that's being done. And I have to compliment all of you for what you're doing there.
Thanks, Mr. Seep. Appreciate your kind words. Yep.
So with all the Facebook posts that we're talking about with maybe Richland County, who's got the authority to actually say, hey, can you put this on there? Like, we say, hey, Health and Human Services, can you put this video on there? And they say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not saying that they will, but like, who's got the authority to say, yeah, you're putting it on there?
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that, but I think that's why I'd like this committee to approve whatever is done so that we have this 7-person committee behind it. And if we run into problems, maybe we can cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm hopeful that most of these videos will be embraced by a lot of departments too, where they'll be like, oh, this is actually really good for us too. So that's what I'm hopeful will happen.
Danielle made a comment in the chat there at the bottom.
Let's see. She said there are admins in the group.
Yeah, Facebook group has an
Exactly,
administrator,
exactly.
so whoever's the admin for the sheriff's office Facebook group.
Yeah.
Clay mentioned in a comment there are over 10,000 followers on sheriff's office one. So
I see. Sheriff Porter, who's the admin on yours? Just let's use that as an example. Is that you or is that someone else?
There's a few admins. Jason Marshall kind of has ultimate control, but myself, Chief Deputy Wallace, Lieutenant Mike says they all have access to post.
Who makes the You're saying MIS doesn't? Yeah.
Oh, I ultimately I make the decision on what can go on or not go on.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. That's helpful. Because yeah, I mean, there are sometimes multiple admins, but then, sometimes you have a point person like the sheriff who will be the ultimate authority.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and the video recordings of these meetings, anyone can share those on any Facebook website, correct?
Of course. Yeah, these are posted on the committee's website. So there's a link and anyone can copy that link and post it on their own personal Facebook page or whatever group they would like to.
Or they could be put on Richland Center Information Exchange or whatever.
Absolutely.
I think that's good PR because these are very good meetings.
Okay, so we got a motion before us. The motion, we don't have it before us yet, so I need someone to make the motion. It's to adopt educational information to use in communicating with the public and develop materials based on this information to be used on radio, newspaper, and social media.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Coppernall.
I'll second.
Second by Unbehan. Yep, Mr. Severson.
With the video that David made, is that something that like, once this motion passes, that we have the ability then to start putting that video out? It's just to come back at the next meeting to present a video.
Okay. That's correct. Yeah, we're not authorizing any communication to go out at this point, except we've got this educational information adopted. So if anyone, I think, wants to, and I'm using the example of Mayor Todd on WRCO, wants to say any of this that comes from that 14-page document.
Yep.
This committee, if we pass this motion, has basically adopted all of that as factual information we believe to be factual and truthful and that we want to be shared with the public. Now, we are going to be coming back though, and I took some notes and maybe I'll rewatch the video if my notes aren't good enough, but I'm going to develop a couple additional pieces that will go within that 14-page document. So that will be amended, but kind of to the spirit of what Mayor Todd said, we can't wait for it to be perfect to start getting information out. So I think if, say you go to a committee meeting or, you happen to be at a Rotary Club meeting or, whatever it is, it's okay to share this information because this information has been adopted by this committee as.
I guess what I was getting at is I just didn't want to see like a video or a post showing stuff that just didn't have another couple people's approval, like maybe your approval and the vice chair's approval before it gets put out. That's just what I was kind of getting at.
Well, I think ultimately, pretty much everything should go through the committee as a rule. I don't think, I would not advocate for delegating that to me and or me and the vice chair. I think it's best just that this committee sees it all. We need more eyes on it rather than fewer, because if we have too few eyes, I think we're more likely to make mistakes. So, a lot of good input,
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Carroll.
So if we pass this, is that sufficient for us to then, when we start going out to the different standing committees, we can start presenting this and getting the departments all in the loop?
That's correct. Yeah, and the next agenda item will hit that, but
Okay.
it was to use this educational information at the standing committees as well.
Is there a, before we vote here, is there a page, like a specific page you would recommend any of you to initially post the Facebook post? And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is so we can correctly utilize Facebook Insights and get data back on who's viewing, where they're viewing all of this. If it's first posted on a page, that will capture that. The admins of that page can get into those insights and get us whatever we want on where it went. I mean, it's on a group first is fine, even on Dave's feed is fine, because what we're really looking for is how many people watching and what they say back to us. But if you really want information, start on a page and share it out from that page to the other places. So is there a specific one, anybody, that we should start with?
Are you an admin for one of these pages?
I am
You
on
are?
groups. I'm not on I'm talking about a county page.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
Talking about
county
county.
Some
page.
kind of official.
So I manage a couple Facebook pages that for different clubs. And so I have this business suite thing that you have. I don't know if the county actually has that manages. So I think we just need to pick one. Needs to be the head, whether we create another one or not. I don't know, but
If there were one for the county board or county administrator or something like that as a starting point to launch it from, and then we can fan it out.
then like the sheriff's department could share then from that Facebook page. I guess that would be.
That's what
I
I'm
agree
talking
with
about.
Tom.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And you just said it, the business suite, then somebody just like Carrie's got a phone just like that and can log into that thing and can pull out whatever you want.
Can someone develop a list to bring back to the next committee meeting with a recommended one place to start? Because we'll probably want to push out one of the videos after our next meeting on a Facebook page. And I'm just wondering if someone can develop that list of Facebook groups for us.
Which county related page, not group, which county related page, I don't care if it's a department, has the most traffic now?
Sheriff's Department, I'm sorry.
Start
Mr. Chair.
there.
Yep, Mr. Carroll?
Dumb question. I don't see a Facebook page literally for just the county.
We don't have one.
Can I,
Mr.
Bridges should be crossed for like a county board page or something. Not that I'm advocating for more stuff for us to do and manage.
Okay, Mr. Cooey is saying he's not sure we have one today, but we may want to do that. Maybe even this could kick off that purpose. Right now, we just have departments.
Mhm.
They have their own Facebook page. We don't have a county-wide one.
So what you want to do in this instance, you want to start with whichever one gets the most eyeballs now, because if you created a brand new page, I mean, it's just, I'm getting into algorithm stuff again. You want that fish to be able to swim without having to fight the current.
Yeah, that's what Supervisor Ruderstorff is saying too, and Sheriff Porter. So
I see that, and Danielle, I see up there a couple of times you said, I agree with Todd. Well, I agree with you back.
well, I'm assuming it's going to be the sheriff's page to answer your question, Todd.
Well, and you guys would know, Sheriff Porter, I think you're still with us. Do you have a problem with that? If a video for this committee was initially posted on your department page and shared out from there?
No, not at this time. I don't really foresee a problem with that. I think if it helps kind of for the greater good, we'll play along with it.
And I think Mr. Koo is right. We should explore, is there a need to create either a county board or official county page or something like that? Because this need to communicate is certainly not going to go away. It's only going to magnify in the future. Not part of our committee charter, but yeah.
Okay, so a lot of great discussion. Let's go ahead and take a vote on this. Ms. Dole, can you do a roll call, please?
Kirk,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Murphy Lopez,
Aye.
Severson,
Yes.
Unbehauen,
Aye.
Rappernell,
Aye.
all voting aye. Did I miss anybody?
Yep, you got everyone. Yep. Okay, thank you, Ms. Dole. So we will go ahead and move forward with that. So thanks for the great discussion, a lot of good input. We got a lot of work that we're going to be doing between now and next meeting. So let's move on to agenda item number 9, correspondence with other committees. So here I've got a recommended motion to authorize communication with other committees using the following outline and referendum committee representatives. So all the resolutions passed at the last county board meeting. Most committees were tasked in the resolutions with completing their duties by October 31st, 2022. One exception was the Fair Recycling and Parks Committee, and theirs is November 30th, 2022. Another one is the ambulance, but they're not really involved in all of this, but maybe they should be, but they're not at this point. So what I'm recommending here is that a representative of our committee attend each committee meeting to follow up on those resolutions under the following outline. So what I'm thinking here is first, and think about yourself here, because I got everyone's name under each one of these, except Mr. Unbehauen. You're lucky. You're on the school board. Even Mayor Todd doesn't escape this one because of red. So one, share information that we just adopted under agenda item number 8. 2, share the committee's public education plans. This will be short-term, both short-term, taking place in September and October, educating the public about the work of the referendum ad hoc committee, and long-term. And that's to be determined, the timeline for long-term education. Just share that if the committee recommends moving forward with an operating levy referendum in 2023, educational materials will be developed for probably about a 2-month period before the ballot measure is placed on the ballot. Maybe it's 3 months, I'm not sure. The third thing that you'll need to do at the committee, if you all agree with this approach, is to request information that we need. The first piece of information we need is how each committee plans to describe the identified property tax levy decrease. So for some, like red, that's going to be super easy. It's the identified property levy decrease is 50% public funding, 50% private funding. So it would be cutting the county's contribution in half. So, it's going to be a half FTE probably, but these bigger committees are going to have a much bigger challenge. Like, how would they describe how they will deal with this property tax levy decrease? The public safety one is the one that jumps to mind. It's 1.7 million by 2027. There are 7 departments included. How are they going to split all that up? How will they describe to the public what those cuts would look like? Is it this many deputies? Is it, what is it? I don't know. I'm not sure. So we're going to need to have some back and forth about how each committee plans to describe this. It can't just be, we can't do it. We have to know, because this is potentially going to go on a referendum. Under 3B, which budget amounts will be recommended as a permanent decrease and which budget amounts will be recommended for inclusion on a potential property tax operating levy referendum to take effect in 2024. So here I'm thinking, a department might say, well, we decided we don't need a half FTE of this position anymore, and we don't want to ask the voters for it either. So we need to know what's permanent, what will they take care of permanently, and what do they recommend going on the referendum. Now, everyone might want more than we want to put on the referendum, but we at least have to know what they're thinking initially. That's my thought there. And then the fourth thing is to collect questions each committee has for our committee. So by just talking about 3A and 3B, you're going to generate 10 questions from them, I'm sure. So I think that's going to be the job of each person as they go to their, as they go to different committees. And then on page 2, there's a chart. I pulled down each of the committee meetings. I had a question mark under yours, Mr. Severson, Fair Recycling and Parks Standing Committee, the one that you chair. Not sure about your next date and time, but you'd be the one going to talk to them anyway, so I don't know if it matters that we have it in here.
We're gonna have several meetings, but we just can't talk about this stuff. We're so close, but just to let you know, I might need somebody to help me out on the HHS and Veterans Standing Committee, just because that is the Thursday and that is the fair day, start day of the fair.
Ah, okay.
So
Okay,
if somebody
good to
from
know.
here could help or something. I may not be there, and I do have 2 other people on the Veterans Committee that are also on the fair committee too.
Well, Supervisor Turk, I only have you down for 1 committee here. I have everyone else down for 2. I wonder if you might be willing to take.
That day I'm going to be in Prairie du Chien all day for
Be
staff.
gone. Okay. Okay, so just looking through here, are there any other, before we try to figure that out, are there any other issues with who would do what on this list? Supervisor Caro, can you do finance and personnel and public works?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't do finance person.
If we could,
Because
Is-
I think it's good to spread out the work.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, and you're on finance and personnel too. Sorry, Dave. I left you off. Yeah, go ahead.
got a response up there. The bottom comment. Whatever Carrie said, we have a response to that. Danielle Rudersdorf
Not sure what it means.
simply says, "You got me, Ms. Rudersdorf. What is
Being on
your
the
com-"
HHS and Veterans Committee?
Yeah, she's also on the fair too.
Perhaps
Supervisor
she's,
Rudersdorf
she
is-
said she could try to help.
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah, she could. I don't know, it's up to whatever. I'm probably gonna be tied up with the fair with my gimp leg and that going on, but you know, Tim and Danielle and Cindy are both on the fair committee also.
Okay, well, and you're probably going to be taking this to your committee after the fair, I would assume. You're not going to be doing it before the fair.
I'm fine
When's-
with doing the fair, just that veterans one in HHS, I'm.
Yeah.
Help with that.
Okay, understood. Okay, so we will maybe I'll just work offline to make sure someone handles that. I think we should have someone from this committee doing it. So maybe I'll talk to Supervisor Caro and Supervisor Frank offline. He's not here today, but maybe I could catch him up on it. Maybe he'd be willing to do that. Since we don't have him tasked with anything else at this point, that's the.
Asking with another one.
Okay, gotcha. Good to know. I'll ask Supervisor Frank if he can do HHS and veterans. Okay, so any questions about this? Anything people would need to make this happen? I want to make
Yeah.
this as easy as.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I want to make sure I'm clear on the item 3 B in terms of it almost sounds like we're asking each department to make the assumption of what the duration of the referendum is supposed to cover. Am I reading that wrong?
Is it based on the 5-year plan?
I think that's probably the most likely answer is based on the 5-year plan. We didn't say that, but in the information, I guess we adopted, we talk about the 5-year plan. I think it's safe to assume that you're asking people about the next 5 years. We have not made that decision, of course.
Right.
But how will we get the information for what it would be beyond 5 years? I mean, that's not going to be at our fingertips, so.
All right. So in other words, the timeframe that the department would assume is that if referendum is recommended and passed, starts in 2024 and goes for 5 years. Am I saying that right?
We go for 4 years.
4 years, okay.
Yes. Because the 5-year financial plan covers 23 to 27, but ARPA funds cover our gap in 23. Okay, any other questions or things people will need? This will be a little bit of a job, so you got to make sure to take this outline and make sure to get the questions answered, get this on the agenda, make sure they have the materials in hand, the 14-page document, which will probably change after our next meeting. So if your meeting's after our next meeting, you'll have to update it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Turk and then Mr. Seat.
The land committee will meet on Monday, the 29th. So would work with what we have now with them.
Yes,
Okay.
we'd work with what we have now. And that's you, Supervisor Turk. Okay. Monday, the 29th, you said? That will be our first one. So you'll be our guinea pig. See how that goes. Okay, let's go ahead and get a motion then on this. To authorize communication with other committees using the following outline and referendum committee representatives, knowing that we need to find a substitute for Supervisor Severson for HHS and veterans.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Go ahead.
I was curious about one thing. I'm assuming that some of the committee members may be attending some committees that they're not on, some standing committees. In which case, would your committee provide per diem for them if they have to go to an extra meeting that they're not on? And is that in your budget?
It's not in the county board rules. The county board rules say that that if a committee requests a certain supervisor, that they're paid per diem. But
yes, well, that's what you're doing, isn't it? In some cases.
Oh, yeah, I guess maybe you could read it that way. So, yeah, I guess you get paid per diem if you go to a committee that you're not typically on. I don't think that's going to affect very many of us. It would affect.
No, but it may affect one or two, and it may, I think it's a matter of perhaps passing a motion to authorize per diem, your committee authorizing per diem for those that are requested to attend meetings that are not part of their regular meeting schedule.
I think I'm the only one.
Well, I thought Mr. Carroll would be asked to go to
He's already on Public Works and Finance and Personnel.
I see.
I'm not on Pine Valley and Child Support.
Thank you.
Yep, and then whoever fills in for Supervisor Severson at HHS and Veterans. Okay, so
I would move that we authorize communication as described in this.
Okay, motion by Carol,
I'll second.
second by Turk. Further discussion on it. Let's take a roll call vote on this too, please, Ms. Dahl. Set.
Bureau,
Aye.
Murphy Lopez. Severson. Unbehaun,
Aye.
Rappernall,
Aye.
Turk.
Yes.
All voting aye. Motion carried.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dahl. So we're ready to move forward with that. Thanks everyone on that. Agenda item number 10, Richland County Towns Association meeting. So Supervisor Severson, I Googled it. Can't remember, the League of Municipalities or someone had this meeting up for March 23rd. Do they meet every 3 months? Is it quarterly?
I'm not sure. I think they meet quarterly is what Brian told me. And Gene Nix was the town's president.
Would you be willing to do some research on this between now and the next meeting?
Yeah.
Because that's by the time we have our next meeting, we'll need to be ready to go to that. And I'm kind of curious to know if you might be willing to take on representing this committee at that meeting.
Good. Some help.
Okay, that will help you. We'll get you ready. But ultimately, you're the one that's got to get up there, you know, and
Present
present.
about that. Make it a
You
group
need a
effort.
two-person thing
Yeah, make it a group effort.
with you leading it. Okay. Okay. Well, if you don't mind just researching when the next meeting is with Jean Nix, if she's still the president of it, and bringing that back to the next meeting, I'll put it on the agenda again so that at least we're not forgetting that, because I think it's a quick way to get to 16 towns at the same time.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I think they have the county boardroom reserved if you want me to look and see when
Could
it
you?
is.
That'd be great. Thank you. The other thing I was going to say is that we do have 5 villages in the county. And so we might want to, on our next agenda, also have something, this kind of gets into the next agenda item, but might just want to have that on there for Viola, Boaz, Yuba, Casnovia, and Lone Rock, to figure out how we could talk about, we go around to all those as well, kind of like.
Are they actually on the Towns Association?
Oh, I don't.
Because Boaz is there. Village of Boaz goes to that. I don't know.
Mr. Chair.
But Gene Nix represents the Village of Boaz.
The town of Viola has its own town meetings, and I informally asked the clerk if it would be appropriate for me to get on the agenda if it was approved, and she said it wouldn't be that big a deal. So whether they also go to the town meetings, I don't know, but they also have their own town board meeting. So
maybe as part of your research, can you just find out the 5 villages go to the towns meeting? I was confused because they're not towns, so that's why I was thinking it was just towns and not villages, but it sounds like villages might also go to the towns meeting. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
at some point, even though we have a city representative on the committee, perhaps we should be making an appearance at the city as well.
Not had the mayor probably had that one up.
Have other people from the committee there too to.
I think that's very important. This is still working. Have some county representation in that room when we talk about it. And again, that's because not just so that, well, first of all, the city council hears it, but that's covered, that's videoed. We've got WRC on the Observer there, all of that again. And so I think that's important.
And then we could also talk about school boards, and do we want to go to the school board meetings too? And if so, which ones? Because we do have a handful of school districts that have very little territory in Richland County, and we will only have so much time, 7 of us, to go to things. So maybe at our next meeting, we can come up with kind of a schedule for how we're going to reach these other agencies. And after we know who goes to the towns meeting in September, we can figure all that out. I just wanted it on here so we weren't dropping that, and then we'll continue the conversation next time. And Mayor Todd, maybe we can get a date. We can pick out a date by that point to go with the city.
Sure. Do you want to, if you want to do this at a city council meeting, the only thing that might come up tends to conflict with when the county board meets.
Council meets twice a month, right?
Yeah.
So
First and third
so we did it
Tuesday.
first Tuesday of the month.
Okay, so our next meeting will be the first Tuesday in October. I'm sorry, in September. Will be our next one. We're done for August. I can get it on whatever agenda you want. I know when you're ready.
Let's talk about it next meeting. So that would push us into October.
That's
Just so we can focus on the standing committees first, make sure we get all that communication happening, and then I think we can roll out the rest of the stuff later. So, yeah, if you could pencil in your head, first Tuesday in October.
I can do that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Todd.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm not finding it. So
Okay, that's okay. We'll,
back on Carrie.
if you can come up with that by next time, Carrie, that'd be great. Okay. So that takes us to future agenda items. So, Mr. Unbehan, do you have any?
I do not.
Okay, Mr. Carroll?
Gonna try to gather more information on referendums that school districts have done as either input on plans they've done that have been successful, or just general suggestions, because we haven't really done much of that yet.
Well, that would be under researching other operating levy referendums, which you volunteered for, and maybe Supervisor Severson will help you. So we didn't specify they have to be county operating levy referendums, so you can certainly use school ones as well for your research. Good question. Okay, Mr. Turk?
I have plenty to do for the next meeting. So.
Yeah, you probably do. Okay, Mr. Severson? Okay, Mayor Todd?
Do we intend at any point, I've heard from a couple of your department heads, and they're all looking at, how do I either raise revenue or face a cut? And I know they're trying to find their own answers. Are we ever going to have any of them attend one of these to give us updates on how they're doing? How do you guys feel about that?
I imagine that at some point we probably will, but we can put that on a future agenda to talk about. I know we're going to be talking with those other committees over the next month, and said we'll have to see how that communication goes, and the communication might turn out to be easiest by having some of them come to us, but which department heads and how many, and we'll have to work with the chairs of each one of those committees.
Okay.
I'm thinking like public safety, because it's got the most. It's got 7 departments under it. So how would we do that? We don't want these to turn into budget hearings, but we might have to have some more direct communication. So I think we can put that on a future agenda too.
What I was thinking about there, so for example, the fairgrounds, you can pick any one of them, and they've all been told, find another funding source if you can. Well, of course, if one of them, for example, does that, that doesn't need to be part of a referendum. So we need to know that.
And I do think that's part of the role of each of us as a representative. So like you're representing Red, this committee on Red. So if you find out from Red that they actually don't need any money from the county anymore, or something like that, you would be bringing that information back to us. So that's really each of our jobs as that representative, going and talking to that committee, making sure that information gets back to us. So at our next meeting, we'll be doing a report out on what people have found at those different committees. And then we might end up finding out we need to invite certain people to come to us or something like that. So it's a good question. Process, we haven't quite understood how this process will work, so I'm glad you're asking. Of course. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending today. We should set our next meeting.
Why not on Labor Day though?
Is that two weeks from today?
Yes.
Would you all be okay with 3 weeks from today?
Tuesday.
Okay, so we've got Tuesday, September 6th and Monday, September 12th.
For you, does it?
Okay, it doesn't work for Mayor Todd. So how does Monday, September 12th work for folks? So you will not be able to come? Okay. Okay, let's look at that first week in September, first full week in September, Wednesday, September 7th.
And 2, it's right before the fair. Fair doesn't start till Thursday, yeah.
Okay.
That's when animals start coming on Thursday. And if it's at nighttime, it'll be good.
Okay, Mr. Ambihan, can you come?
I'm available.
Okay, Wednesday, September 7th. Mr. Turk? Okay. Yes, so let's take a motion to adjourn to 6 p.m. on Wednesday, September 7th.
So moved.
A motion by Turk, second by Caro. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.